I will tell you, after walking through the neighborhoods myself, all the way from 1431 back on the Kingsland side, and then yesterday in the Llano side, I will tell you the one thing I'm very, very concerned about is we have a very large senior population here. And they absolutely did not want to leave. And so there are folks, seniors, that have muck all through their house, and they're really not able. They're just, doing what they can. So I tell you, as you see crisis pieces like that, y'all already been through experience, most of you anyway, through some of this. Please report that back. Look, I am in constant contact with the governor's office, and those resources have been pushed forward. There's assets staged out there. The piece, though, is really this assessment that you're looking at doing. It's absolutely critical to make sure that those resources are engaged and so forth. I did deliver to Judge Oakley yesterday morning the governor's declaration without waiting. He got a first-hand view in terms of photos and things that were sent from multiple agencies and so forth, and so he immediately got AT&T and others out here reestablishing the communication so at least people's cell phones will work, and all those sites have already been posted. We have Texas Military Department has an entire transportation company, some pre-positioned in Burnett and other places to back y'all up as y'all may see emergency needs. But look, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being here. And we greatly, greatly appreciate it. This is the worst we can see. The 97 flow is nothing even like this. So we still don't know what we don't know. And you guys are going to be the eyes and ears that's going to basically be able to share that information. So again, thank you so much. Please reach out if there's anything you need. Just Terry Wilson. I do answer my own email. So please don't hesitate to get in touch with me. Thank you again.
Thank you. Okay, we'll break here. We'll take 12 volunteers up there. Do you have anything else to add?
No, I'm just listening to see if we're going to attract volunteers out of this big group before we disperse.
Yes, let's. I know Team Rubicon has left the building, and there. I think there'll be one of them who'll get Austin Disaster Relief Network. Will you have somebody over there with us? Okay. And then Texas Baptist Men.
We had another floods, another 5, 6 in a home. So in 1 year, we had 4 disasters. The network of churches, to show you what happens when the churches decide to work together, align together, we were able to sponsor nearly 900 families to walk with them. And all these are people that said, we want a church to walk with me. I can't do this by myself. Will the church walk with us? And I tell you what, like Stephen said, when people don't have people around them, they don't do real well. And so in numbers, about 60% of those didn't even have a church connection. So the folks that are going to be coming to the mark, in next week, you might see the same numbers. 50, 60% don't even have a church they would call home. And you may become that church. And we see, like Stephen said, multitudes of lives transforming. They don't even know what they're about to encounter with the love of Christ and the body of Christ coming around them. We can help you if you want to take that route. We've helped multiple cities in that. Everything we're proposing will be decisions that this band of brothers and sisters will have to make a decision on. So I'm going to just say the why behind an alliance, a network. Now, some of you may or may not know, but prior to this disaster, God was already moving on the hearts of Marble Falls. They had called me out, and I spoke just at the Presbyterian Church. Was it 3 or 4 weeks ago, and they were saying, gosh, we could have, we came so close to being in that last disaster, and they were really interested in seeing what would it take to build a disaster relief alliance in Marble Falls. And then Jackie came to a summit that we had about what does it take to do what we do. That was last weekend, 2 weeks ago. So God was on the move. It's amazing. You see of the heart of the Lord, He always does this. Every disaster, He makes us look like we know what we're doing. It's amazing. I can't tell you. You see it all the time. Why a network? Well, number one, the coordination and the mobilization is a big difference between churches doing what they want to do together, which, if it wasn't for the church, by the way, it would be a horrible disaster, right? The church is so key when disasters strike. All these ones we watch on TV, if it wasn't for the church it would be bad, but it's even a much better picture, I believe, when the church works together. So we did leave you some stats in there. We won't go through them, but you, on your own, can look at the 8-year stats. That just is not at all to say this is what we've done. It's to show you what can happen when churches come together. It shows you some pretty phenomenal things that can happen behind the network of churches. God does bless, like it says in Psalm 133, that He blesses when the brothers dwell together in unity. I'm going to give you a couple stories here too of hopefully to encourage you on kind of forming this alliance. It's so key to be able to share information together, to have a coordinated communication system in place. It will make a night and day difference and to avoid duplication. Because yes, unfortunately, a survivor goes to your church, then they go to your church, and then your church, and you don't know because you're not talking that this survivor is connecting, asking for the same thing from everyone. And sometimes it just, they're afraid that they're going to run out, so let's grab everything. But it can be coordinated. Raising funds. Big donors won't give to a church. Then you might in your own church, you might raise 50, 60,000, that's wonderful. But if you want more of the millions, and to raise millions to come behind to help your people, then it does take a coordinated effort. We have sent out about 10.6 million through Harvey. You know, we could not have done that if we were one church, right? Even like the man here that spoke, Kevin, you know, it makes a difference to have one voice at the EOC than multiple churches trying to, you know, to have a word in, right? And I know for the city of Austin, they're very thankful to have a voice on behalf of 185 different Christian churches, different denominations, different, you know. And then lastly is developing an infrastructure for the response, how to meet the spiritual physical needs. Because no matter what, as a church, they're going to be knocking at your door. I mean, you probably, how many of you already have some people wondering what's going to happen, can you help me out, etc. So let me give you a little thing of what some stories here. In Rockport, we're working with about 15 churches, you know, Hurricane Harvey. And in Rockport, as those churches are experiencing what a church normally experiences, people coming, knocking on the door, help, right? There's a long-term recovery. There's a lot of great efforts going out, but it just happens. It could be the members, etc. We have empowered them with the ability to have the forms to be able to help those individuals out, whether it be emergency needs, whether it be rebuilding, repairing, you name it. We've supplied them so the church can be an asset to those people in times of disaster. And so that's what we've done through those churches. They've formed an alliance. They're praying together, which is a huge difference, like Stephen said, of a make and break of how this whole relief effort is going to go. So let me give you some things that worked and don't work. I was there. How many of you were there during Bastrop Fires 2011? Anyone? Anyone of you part of the long-term recovery team in Bastrop? You may have were there in the very early days, those first 6 months. It was kind of tough, right? It was struggling. It was easy. These things aren't easy to pull together. What we would call long-term recovery. And my encouragement always is the churches to be involved in the long-term recovery. It's our position. It's what God has called us to be. Somehow, 100 years ago, it feels like the church has kind of stepped out of some of that kind of care because we thought maybe the government's job is to do that. Well, you know, if we don't do it, you know, who will? You know, I believe that the Lord can use a donkey, but His church is the A-team. It's the team that He wants to use. So in those meetings, the beginning days, there wasn't a lot of prayer. There was no prayer being lifted up. And in Spicewood, you had a group of churches that came together and said, we're going to do this together. It was actually led by the church, the long-term recovery efforts. And they prayed. And they invited God in. And I'm telling you, it was a night and day difference in those first 6 months between what was going on in here, what was going on there. The moment these guys switched to inviting God into the meetings, it became a whole different story. Now Bastrop is known as one of the best long-term recovery teams that I think has ever formed. Those guys rock. I mean, they know how to do it. But so the reason why I bring that point up is is that, we can roll up the sleeves and get in the dirt and sand and muck homes and all that, but it's a 9-day difference in every disaster scene for those that depend on God and those that don't. I know I'm talking to pastors, but I figured I'm going to mention that to you. The second thing is this: in Denham Springs, many of you are familiar with the 2016 great floods. We went out there to Denham Springs. We touched about 2,400 homes. We helped form the long-term recovery team in an area that had 90% impact. 5 businesses were standing in Denham Springs. Just 5. That was maybe 1 gas station. It's not City Hall. Every area was impacted. Okay? What happened? Well, fortunately, the churches aligned together just like this. In a meeting just like this, they said, we're going to do this. We're going to be part of the long-term recovery team. And I'll explain what that means in a moment. We're going to help walk with the whole process through the whole. They ended up in 3 weeks. For those who've been part of long-term recovery teams, you'll know how amazing this is. A God story. They sought the Lord first. They got on their knees. In 3 weeks, they had a website. They had their board. They are raising funds. They have their whole long-term recovery team and the key leaders, the key committees, all picked because they said, you know what? We want to own this. And because of it, millions of dollars came through. Because of it, did they see bumps? Did they have trials? Unfortunately, I wish I could promise you that won't happen. The Lord always has that for us. We must go through them. But it's an amazing story because churches decided to pull together. So let me talk to you now about some of the things I want to share. I had a donor offer $100,000 to help launch the efforts of a church alliance come together. And the reason why I just was talking to them on the phone, they would like to make this a matching grant where if you have donors, it could double. Sometimes when you have donor money invited, it can really turn things around. We would love to even see churches, put their own, kind of money where our efforts are. This is just an idea for you to think about. No matter what, a 501c3 will have to probably be formed for a long-term recovery. Just because that long-term recovery will need to raise money for the rebuilding, repairing efforts of this disaster. It could go on for 1 year to 3 years, depending on how many homes. For Bastrop, there's 300 homes, 300 plus homes. That was 3 years for that many homes, with the Mennonites coming out to repair and rebuild and lead the charge. That money is there for executive leadership. So this money is earmarked to pay for the salary of a director, for a caseworker, to get things started off the bat if the churches decide to work together. But this donor is interested in the churches coming together to work together. So that money is available for you. Normally, most disasters, your number one struggle right after you say, we're going to do this, is trying to raise the seed money. And it could take a little bit of time because you're new and you're just getting your 501c3 in place and so on. So that money is available for you, and we'll be happy to cut that check when that time arises, if we can pull something together. If you all feel that and call to it. For those out in Lano, and I've got maybe a Kingsland person here, we can talk about that too for y'all. Stephen, you're still in disaster mode.
If we had to call this meeting, none of that would happen.
Yeah, so but we do need about a couple hours with you to talk about the things that pastor's going to want to know. So maybe what we need to do is just figure out another time to meet, unless we move to another site down the street, if we've got a quick site open. But I could do what I needed to do in 15 minutes if we could leave with lots of questions. Why don't we just think about what to do next? You want to maybe help us out here?
I'm going to wander around and see if we can find another room for the meeting.
Yeah, I mean, if we can get another room, I've got the time, if you've got the time, we're willing to stay an additional couple hours. Because we want to leave space for Q&A. We want to kind of give you a lot of scenarios that what worked or didn't work. And we have some really good news too, also about money that one of our major donors is ready to invest in what we're going to talk about today. Why don't we pray?
Amen.
Jesus, we just need you. We thank you, God, because you do have the answers. So we think you're big enough to even help us in this situation.
Yes, God.
So Lord, we thank you that you'll help us find that space that we can meet, because we're here today to speak and hear what you want to do through your church. And we're just so thankful that you're ahead of the game. You even moved upon churches here 3-4 weeks ago when we met just to talk about what does it look like to have a disaster church alliance of churches willing to work together for disaster relief. And you were already working in our hearts. So we acknowledge your sovereignty. And we just, Lord, we declare too, there's no disaster bigger than you. Even though this may feel overwhelming, the truth is that you're the first responder, the last responder, you never leave. You're the great I am, the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and the end. Lord, we thank you for the peace that will rest upon us. I ask you, God, for supernatural strength upon all these pastors. I know from a pastor's perspective and what can happen in the middle of a crisis with all the congregation, just lots of people having questions. It could be overwhelming. Give them supernatural strength. Help them find those Stevens and mighty men and women of God who will come around them and undergird their efforts to walk with them, so that way they're not left alone, Father. And if some pastors here have lost their homes, Father, help us be able to also find those people so we can get them back in the feet so they can do what they do best. So Lord, guide our meeting today. Direct us, God, in the short time that we have. May you be glorified. In Jesus' name.
Amen.
I'm going to let Stephen is our Associate Director, and I'm going to let him speak here, and we'll see what Jackie comes up with.
Yeah. We feel so honored to get to stand before you today as the ones who have been called really by God to serve and love on this community around you. And this is a critical hour to do that. The decisions we make are monumental and will have lasting impact. As we had shared, we had come with a game plan today of what we thought this meeting would look like, and that looks a little different, but welcome to disaster relief, right? We make plans, and we show up open-handed, and we let the Spirit of God guide us, and we do the best that we can with what we have. I'm going to kind of move through what I plan to share with also an open hand, just not knowing fully if we have the remaining time till 11:30 is what that meeting is scheduled towards. But there's some key things that we want to be able to bring before you to share with you on a high level, just to set not just the immediate needs before us, but a longer-term perspective, but also to create some space for some dialogue, some things to consider, things that maybe won't get answered today, but they would be so valuable to be thinking about now versus 2 and 3 months from now. And so we really see our primary function, just again, if there's any in this room that are not in a pastoral or staff role, local church, or corporate organization, just know that our hearts, we see our functions, the Austin Disaster Relief Network, is to really coordinate with the local churches to help the local church be more effective in working with community and with agencies as a united front, as a united effort. We've seen the night and day difference that makes in communities where churches are working together and churches are not, and the miscommunication and duplication of efforts and things that can happen. And so just a quick overview of what we hope to share with you. Not sure we'll cover all of this, but who we are, some of the things that are before you, how we might be able to help, some of the key components of disaster response from our perspective, the value of forming this network and alliance of churches, and then also how to actually do that to unite crisis response as local pastors. We're going to create some space for some Q&A as well, because there's some big questions that still to be asked. And then even if we have some time at the end, maybe have a moment to pray together. One of the objectives that we've come in with this meeting as well is to identify a leadership core team that would be part of the local alliance to help lead out in this response effort. That may be the existing structure and some people that are a part of that alliance. There may be some others that are a part of that. But we've seen that be so effective when a few leaders can gather together, help make decisions, and communicate that broadly to the local network or alliance of churches. quickly, I'll just introduce myself. I think Daniel might have, my name is Stephen Brewer, Associate Director. Daniel's the Founder Director of 80 Earned. We're a network of over about 185 churches in the 5 counties of Greater Austin. And we've learned some things over the last 10 years that we've been formed that we'd like to share some of those things with you. Really in the hope that it might serve you and empower you to be even more impactful to this community that needs you in this critical hour. And I will say there's organizations that are in this room, may still be in this room, that have been doing disaster relief well longer than we have, and we learn from them, and we love collaborating with all kinds of agencies, but we see our unique place as the gatherer of the local church within a specific region to really multiply our efforts. And we believe that Jesus Christ, through his local church, is the hope of the world. So I just want to share a couple of quick things that I think might kind of set the stage for the rest of what we have to share. We were in a panel meeting with Art Acevedo. If any of y'all know him, the previous chief of police in Austin. I would ask for some water, but I know water is a little bit lacking around here. I forgot to bring my own water. Is that yours? Oh. Yeah. I went to the water fountain out there and I'm like, oh, this is what you guys are having to navigate through right now. Thank you, Daniel. Chief Art Acevedo shared something really powerful. He's moved 1 month before Harvey happened, one of the greatest disasters our nation has seen, into the heart of it in Houston, Texas. And he said, as he spoke before his men, he said, this moment, how we respond to this disaster will be spoken about for years to come. And I just declare this over you, you get to help write that story. What will the story that's told in years to come, even by your children, about how this area, the community, and the church has responded to this overwhelming need? You get to help write that story. A critical player in the Port Arthur area, just outside of Beaumont and Harvey, who's really a unifier in that community of pastors, Joe Worthy. He said before a meeting like this, he said, if we don't come together, our community will suffer for it. And that couldn't be more true. There's 3 phases of disaster response. We are in the very first stages of the relief phase. Again, some of you may be familiar, but this may be new language for some, so we want to set that picture. The relief phase is typically about 2 to 4 weeks, maybe longer. But that's really, if you can imagine, kind of the stabilize. That's the assessment. We have to know what we're dealing with. We have to get these people in a clean place, shelter, food in their stomachs, clothes on their backs, right? Breathing again. Let's stabilize the situation. But camera crews will go home. They'll pack up and go home. And the story outside of this community will not continue to be told in months to come like it is being told right now. And some organizations that come in for a specific purpose will pack up and they'll mobilize to the next disaster. But the local church that's walking with this community long-term, empowering them to get back on their feet in practical ways. That first phase is so critical, and we want to be very much a part of that. But know also there's another phase, and that's the recovery phase. It's about 1 to 6 months after the disaster. That's the phase where the dust starts to settle, and people begin to realize, my life will never be the same. It's an emotionally heavy time. If you've ever spoken to someone who's lost a loved one, they'll tell you that it really didn't hit them until 3 or 4 weeks after the loss. It was so surreal. Of course, there was a lot of food coming, a lot of cards, and thank you. But about a month after the life-altering tragedies, when the dust starts to settle, people say, wow, my life will never be the same. There's actually studies that show the single greatest difference between people who can recover from a life-altering tragedy and those that never fully recover is one thing, and it's relationship. Was this person relationally connected with someone to help walk with them through those most tragic and darkest hours of their life? And that's why we encourage during this phase highly to the local church what we call the shepherding or sponsoring of families. That's where a small group at a church may come around a specific family and help address their physical and emotional needs, as well as connect them to local resources. And we have a platform or process for that. And then the longer term is the rebuild phase. We're talking 6 months to maybe 3 years plus. And so those are different stages, but we can be aware that this isn't done in a month. Y'all know that. This is, you all know that, but it's good to be reminded of that and what the stages are. Some of the key components to crisis response that we see, and again, clearly these are not the entirety of them, but from our perspective, these are key, maybe not in your face, not the obvious kind of things that we want to, as a local church, you want as a local church be thinking about now. And that is one, prayer. I'll tell you, when spiritual leaders gather together, humble themselves, and pray, mountains move.
Yeah.
Mountains move, and we've seen it countless times, and that's what God's after. Emotional and spiritual care. I'll tell you, everybody that's been impacted by a life-altering tragedy, they may not walk up to the emotional help tent, I'm good, I don't need help, but everyone benefits through allowing, being taken through this process that allows them to think through, to share what they've experienced, and to really debrief them through that. And so the emotional, the spiritual care is so instrumental. And we believe that the church is uniquely positioned to help provide that. Survivor data collection. Now, I'll tell you, recently, we've been working with some of the folks in Houston as well as other places, even still for the Harvey response. And one of these key areas, because they've broken Houston out in a bunch of different regions, one of these key areas told me recently, he was the executive director of a committee they formed there, and he said, somebody asked me, he said, if you could tell these communities like Michael, where it's happening in Florida, or Florence, in the North Carolina area, what would be one thing that you would tell them? And this guy, Steve, tells us, it's like, if I could just tell them one thing, I would hand them the 2-page ADRN form that the ADRN gave us that collects 169 data points from these individuals. And I'd do that as soon as I can, because data will drive everything. It will drive decisions. Freddie said, as he shared earlier, resources that are coming in now, but that data will actually drive decisions that are made 6 months from now, a year from now. And so the sooner that there can be a collaborative effort to collect that data in a systemized, consistent way, the more effective and empowered this community and the local church can be in that.
If I could interject, what they talked about earlier is called an assessment. That's more of the home, where it stands, how many homes are flooded, how much water, etc. What we're talking about here is a whole different form. When the mark opens next, there's Monday and Tuesday in Atlanta, Wednesday, Thursday in Kingsland. We'll be there, and one of our objectives typically is to bring our crisis intervention team to debrief, pull out of trauma, everyone that we talk to. They won't even know. We'll just start off by saying, tell us your story, what happened. And because if they don't get pulled out of the trauma, their brains become this tangled ball of emotions, and they don't really do much when you're in that zombie state. So you got to pull them out. They might be at a 10. We hope they leave it at 1 or 2 level, right? But 2 is that we'll collect their data. Now, we're hoping that if there were 100 homes impacted, all 100 families will show up, right? There'll be some, obviously, that'll say, I'm fine, I've got the $1 million house, and I don't need any help. And they probably still need the debriefing, but we will collect data. The purpose of us collecting data is to turn it right back over to the community. So we'll get them to sign off right from the start of that. It's okay to share my data with, the long-term recovery, with the things that we'll share with you in a moment. So,
absolutely. Thank you for clarifying that. And again, one of these other key components, I alluded to it earlier, but it's this process that we call shepherding families or sponsoring families, come alongside of them from that longer term, the first 2, 3, 4 months, come them back on their feet in practical ways. And it has everything to do with relationship and a little less to do actually with the stuff. But it can be, I'm telling you, transformative. And that's what we're ultimately after. We're believing for transformation really in the lives of the people that we serve. Fundraising, another key component. Everyone who's been a part of this in past knows that it's much more difficult to raise funds 6 months from now. That now's the time, and with that plan and organizations from the outside are looking for those that would work together, a unified front and a clear way with accountability to be able to give. I mean, they're wanting to do that, and so the sooner that kind of a framework can be established, the more quickly those funds can be collected for that longer term response that we need, not just in months, but even in the years if we're discussing rebuild. And also, one of the last things I'll mention, we're talking about key components, is a core team of people at your church. Many of you are in a staff role at your church, and we know that your plate's more than full, right? 6+ days out of the week. So one of the things that we've seen most effective with the network of churches in our area is when that church has a core team of people in place that's really able to help serve underneath the church leadership, and they're empowered and they're helping communicate and organize and mobilize, carrying some of that administrative load that may be falling on your plate at this point. Let me just say, those are just some high-level things. There's a number of other things that we've not even touched yet, like cleanup and other things as well that we're going to maybe even open some dialogue about. But I shared those with you just as maybe some of the things that are not so much on the forefront of our radar. But we're telling you, the emotional and the spiritual care, that doesn't happen unless there's a plan in place and coordination behind it. Because even as ministers in this room, if we're honest, we can get, all of us, we can get so focused on responding to the physical need that we miss the opportunity to really minister in a deeper and more lasting, meaningful way to these families that desperately need it. And we want to be prepared with a process and a coordination in place to do that effectively. I'll just share this too before I transition over to Daniel. As I was reflecting upon this meeting, I felt like the Lord brought to mind 1 Corinthians 3. And it says the quality of our work will be tested. Right? The quality of our work will be tested by fire. And we want the house that is built here to remain. Amen? And we, our part is to come alongside of you to serve you however we can, to share with you what we've known, the mistakes maybe we've made along the way, not as the experts in the room, those that are still learning, but those who have made some significant discoveries and been empowered by the Spirit of God in our responses over these last 10 years throughout the region and beyond it. So, Daniel, do you want to step in and share some of these other things? You bet.
So, just to, before I go to my next little section here, Stephen talked about shepherding. This area has seen a lot of disasters. We don't even know what's going to happen to Austin. We got to prepare our resources for a massive deployment just around the area. In the year 2015, we had the Memorial Weekend floods. Then we had the small Bastrop fires again. Then we had the October floods, that was historic. Memorial was historic, 3,600 homes, another 3,000 plus homes. And then we in May, again, Memorial. Churches, I can tell you, if you said, where are all the transportation? Who has the buses? Where is all the space churches have space to housing? I can give you all that assessment just within a short period of time. It's good to know what you have in terms of assets. That's one of the things that a network does. So before we go, we will find out which one of you want to just talk for another 15 minutes, and then we'll figure out a time to re-meet again. And it doesn't have to be 5 people. It could be all of you again. But so we'll do that before we leave here. Other questions?
And could I just clarify something? You touched on it, but I want to say it louder. The beauty of the ADR, and as I saw the vision, is that when it's set up, it's really not pastors who have to meet and pull all the levers and punch all the buttons. We want key people from our church maybe to step up and be exercising their gifts to advance the vision. But as pastors, we all have churches and pastoral needs and people that need to receive spiritual care and ministry in our congregations. And so this is not conceived to be something that, one more meeting that pastors have to go to and one more project that pastors have to make happen. There needs to be a group of pastors who will step up and say, we think there's value in this for our community, and so we'll be part of instigating it and giving some advice and consent and some inspirational leadership. But the first step would be identifying key people who have gifts in our collective congregations who would carry most of the developmental and administrative load so that we don't have to go to another meeting or make something happen on our own.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because every church on our network, or at least they should have, if they don't have, should have a disaster relief coordinator, which is a volunteer, is the liaison for the church, and they're the mouthpiece to the leader. Having someone that's a strong person boy, to carry that weight, because it's the last thing you need is another thing on your plate, especially during a time like this. So, yeah, we don't have a single pastor involved in anything from, if that helps out. It's all operated. But again, what we do is we can train those individuals and help equip those individuals with what their job duties could be. So.
Any other questions? Well, why don't we do this? Oh, it is.
Stephen, I don't know what you're about to do, but, and so if what I'm going to say, you already had it on your agenda, just push it to the side. I was curious to ask y'all, based on what you know about where our community is right now, and where you know, like we are, what would your advice be? Sorry, I'm not talking well this year.
Oh, that's okay. No, it's just allowed.
What advice would you have for us moving forward to communicate with one another based on what y'all have seen so far? If that needs to be down the road, is a question we can push it down further.
That's a great question. So those are the types of questions that we have found that are actually more effective to be answered once a core team's been identified. And so if there's a handful of people in here that, and this is one of the interest forms we want to get you to fill out before you leave, and we're going to ask that group of people to kind of pull back and maybe just even for a few minutes to connect. May not be everyone in here, but if it's a large group to start and you're just kind of curious, you're welcome to be a part of that. But that is one of the, I think, the first decisions that group would, we would encourage them to make collectively. We have some things that have maybe worked for us, but that doesn't mean it's the best solution for you. A channel, kind of an online platform to either share information, share communication, I know there's already an existing alliance that meets, and so there's communication channels that have already been utilized in that, and maybe that's growing and expanding, and so some of those conversations can be happening amongst that core group of people. Once that's identified, established, then relay that information to everyone else, along with the additional information that we collect here from this meeting, in addition to the contact info. That's a great question.
Before we leave too, we thought, because we had pastors here, let's just at least take 5 minutes and break up into groups, and let's just all go into, because I know we've all done that probably independently, but Ben, I don't know how often this group will come back again, but just to, let's, ask God, invite him in, and ask for his help, and as in prayer, some prayer groups here.
Yeah. So it would be okay if before we did that, we just gave y'all a few moments just to go ahead and fill out that form before you. If you need a pen, there may be a couple of them up here. I'll collect those.
Ross, do you need a pen? Thanks.
Anyone need a pen? I got an extra.
Green, Baylor Green.
The local governments working with Red Cross or other agencies to create a space for all the ones offering different services to come to the table in one place. So that's happening in every area, but I believe, except for this one. So I think one of the questions that we had was, would that happen here? The questions of cleanup's been already addressed, but the donations management. And I believe am I right, First United Methodist Church is that collection point here, but we've got some experience in that. We may be able to work with the church that is designated for that. But the value of being in a room like this, and some of this I know is already happening, is this person is owning this, but we've got First Baptist over here, they're owning shelter, and what are some of the other needs, and what churches can step in and address those? And then I know Daniel's going to speak in just a moment about a few details of the long-term recovery committee, but then even identifying a core team. Are there those in this room that would be interested in being a part of a core group of pastors that we would maybe meet with after this meeting and work with kind of a more centralized focus to make decisions? One of those decisions being, how are we going to share information between us, right? How are we going to communicate going forward? When are we going to gather next to come together, to pray together, to share additional updates? Who in here is doing what, right? And we actually have a form in here we'd love you to fill out before you actually leave. So we can collect that and hand that over to the core team to begin the process and determine these churches doing what. I know there's a couple of key main churches in here we all know, but there may be others that are offering resources and helping the communities that would be hugely valuable. Look at the list, and this is what's happening in these areas by these churches, and of course that will grow in the days ahead. And so, Daniel, do you want to share a bit about the long-term recovery, or open up to questions?
Yeah, I wanted to do that real quick, but I want to just say here too is just where do we see ourselves standing in this? Because we're like the Baptist Men, United Baptists, and other groups. What we're doing behind the scenes, I think you should know, we're for the Harvey disaster, the mayor called Adrian to be kind of a distribution site for the entire city. And we ended up shipping about 203 semis out from it, so it became super busy. Good, that's a lot of trucks. Prior to that, we had shipped out 2. Give you a big taking. We're believing it won't be like that this time, but we are going to be opening up hopefully around 60, 80, 100,000 square feet of warehouse space. Again, we don't know how big Austin's impact is. We won't know until this week. But it's awesome to hear that you already have the distribution sites. That's like number one thing. That's a really important thing. It's awesome that you've got the cleanup going and organized through the church. So that's another awesome, because we could not provide that for you. It's good that the community does those things, right? You never want an organization to really run your community. It needs to be the community, right? So that's awesome. I'm telling you, all are way ahead to encourage you. As bad as this looks, you're actually, on my score, I'd give you an A+ so far in regards to you're really moving wonderfully. Now, as we're getting those goods and supplies, we'll talk to those churches and find out their specific needs, and like kind of a Walmart big distribution center drops off specifics, we can do that. That's what we did to Rockport. We shipped out to 32 cities. We can get you what you need. If some of your churches starting to say, I can open up a little space, and because you got so many people, just let us know. We'll be happy to ship things to you. We already have quite a bit of stuff just in general, because this is all we do. But we're believing that we're going to have a large warehouse. All of our press is going out on today, actually, for beginning tomorrow, and we'll start seeing the line. So we're going to try to collect Austin to bring Austin stuff to you. And again, it'll be per your needs, not just a load. Now, if you want clothes, they come, but we give you them sorted. So you don't get them in the black trash bags where maybe 80% are, you have to send it to third world country and you keep 20. Because we have a thrift store that's ready to go. I don't know if people will want to drive there. It's a far drive, but normally in a disaster in Austin, we'll give them a wristband. They can shop for free, and they get up to 5 sets of clothes and shoes. And we have the Austin Shoe Hospital just did a drive of 20,000 shoes. People need all that. You'd be surprised. Clothing's a weighty thing, but it's actually one of the greatest needs. I've had so many cities say we don't want clothes, but when we bring out we'll bring out a mobile thrift store, sometimes 2 big tent and all that. Oh man, clothes go up like this. But when we bring them out, men's are in this box, extra large, men's large shirts in this box. I mean, it's that kind of sorting that we do, so that way the weight is off of your shoulders, because we know what it feels like to be in the middle of a disaster. So we try to do those things for cities. And another thing that we do is the crisis intervention, which we were talking about, we call CISM, providing emotional, spiritual care. But our recommendation is, if this alliance forms, that we train you how to do CISM. So for the long term, people are going to keep going. We can do it the one time, but you're going to be here forever, right? These people are going to, one city, a year later, we were called out because the people are still so traumatized because no one did it. And we went to 300 homes door to door helping these people out. So we can provide that too, that training. And then lastly, some of you might say, the shepherding. The shepherding program, which is the one where churches walk with families, that is by far where the biggest impact. And all the things we do, our number one goal is that. I mean, we can give stuff away all day long. We can muck out homes. From a church perspective, if we even rebuilt their home, but their eternal home is still on fire. That's the worst disaster of all.
That's good.
And so that's the thing from a church perspective. Now, let me give you one other scenario. In West Texas, when the explosion happened, 300 homes, we were there, we took all the data, we began forming the Waco Disaster Relief Network because West was so impacted. They came around, the West pastors, they formed an alliance. They sponsored 276 families, which is basically almost all that came to us. I saw a report in Charisma magazine, revival broke out in that community. It made Charisma news. And because the church rallied around the people, and suddenly the churches start seeing double, triple attendance because people that didn't attend before started to attend because their hearts were so moved by the love of Jesus Christ through His church. So that's what we normally see when the sponsoring happens. And we can show you how that's done in a way, and you can make it your own. So anyway, we'll be happy to provide that help if needed. Yes, Jackie, you have a question?
I just wanted to point out a couple of things. Everything that you guys have shared has been really meaningful and inspiring. But two things I want to point out. We talk about this being the Marble Falls, Kingston thing because that's the disaster that we're dealing with right now. But the vision would be for this to be a Vernon County thing. Because Marble Falls had a disaster this time and Kingston had a disaster this time, doesn't mean that there won't be fires or problems with Lake Canada next time and stuff. So this is a bringing together of all the churches in Vernon County. Just Vernon was lucky today, but we have folks from Vernon who are here who are making who want to be involved in this because it's a Vernon thing. It's a Vernon County thing. Second is this, and Daniel just now alluded to it. You're not drinking from a fire hose right now. Oh my goodness, all this stuff and all the stuff we have to learn, all the stuff we have to keep up with. There's just so much to manage. One of the things that was impressed upon me in the meeting that I went to is that there are training resources for up to different, 18 different types of skills and processes that ADRN can train people in. So it's not just like they're saying, hey, let's all get together and let's form these networks and just see what happens. When you start having core teams will have the opportunity to actually be trained in a certain set of skills. And the network that we're talking about building, we don't have to really make any of this stuff up and hope that we get it right. There are people who have lived through this that will be able to train anybody in our churches that gets involved so that they will be skilled and in some cases credentialed to deliver professional level services in addition to just loving people in the ministry. But just want to point that out.
Can I mention something? Yes.
Hey Jackie, do you think it would be possible that this could be the Barnett County / Llano County?
Oh, yeah, that.
Okay.
I didn't mean it intentionally exclude Llano.
32 miles.
Yes, I was actually thinking of the name sort of like,
Anyway.
I was thinking of the name like the Highland Lakes Disaster Relief.
Right, perfect, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to acknowledge too, just with some of these wonderful large organizations that are non-denominationally based, like the Baptist Men, Core, and the others that are here. We love collaborating with others, and we see a unique role that we have. But we know that even our role as a local church is a part of the greater response, and some of you may be a part of those networks. And so, as we worked well with churches in the greater Austin area, we've always come from the approach of, hey, look, you don't have to make a decision of which organization you want to be at. We all hope to bring our piece to the table. There's some very unique and specific things that Texas Baptist men may do that we don't, like chainsaw, right? But there are other things that are unique to this. And the localized network of churches that only the local church can do, like sponsoring families. And so we said, we just encourage people to consider both. It's not an oppositional thing. Hey, if we're sending out cleanup teams and Texas Baptist Men is mobilizing cleanup teams and you're part of the local Baptist church, man, go with them. You don't need to go through us, but we hope to bring some of those pieces to the table that are not already at the table and allow for a localized church network to respond effectively and united.
One last piece, because we know that this is still a little ways away, but this sheet here this is a part of a 32-page slide. I just pulled out one. This is what's going to happen when the dust settles. So this normally happens while cleanup begins. Maybe this begins in a week or two. But what we'd like to do is call a core team. Some of you are feeling stirring already right now in your heart, God saying, I'd like to be on a team to help begin the process of forming this. But let me kind of tell you where it's going to have to go. So every disaster, this has to form. Now, we know that this area is under the Central Texas VOAD. How many of you know what a VOAD is? Volunteer organizations assisting in disaster. So these are all the nonprofits come together at a table to help form these alliances. They help form this. In Denham Springs, Louisiana, there wasn't one of those. I'm not sure how active, does Central Texas VOAD meet with the people out here? Do you all know if there's any active?
Highland is not under the Central Texas, but when I spoke to Damien a couple years ago, he said they would provide support.
They would provide support, okay. So, every disaster, if this isn't formed, it's a disaster. All right? And every disaster I've been to, this has been formed. So, but this is not the 80 ends of the world that created. No, this is the churches. Now, there's case and scenarios where the church did not show up. It wasn't good. I was there. They wouldn't let even a Bible go out to a family. They wouldn't even let us, because we were Christians, even go to a home to say thank you. And even though we funded the rebuilding and repairing the home, they just wanted the money. And so if the church doesn't show up, the enemy right now is going to try to answer this question. A lot of people are saying, why did God do this to me? We're the ones that provide the response. If we're not there, then, that question will be answered by the enemy. So we have to bring the love of Jesus Christ. And there's a short window. I mean, we got to make decisions. But a long-term recovery looks like this. If you look at this chart, these are just the different sections that have to happen. So they're in this long-term recovery. There's a person that's going to oversee donations, management. There's another one that deals with communications. Another one that deals with spiritual care. Another leader, and these are volunteer leaders, that handles the financial side. Normally they hire CPA or someone to do that. Someone has to handle the volunteer management, but because already that piece is happening, I think already a lot of things are kind of happening without this happening yet. It just needs to be formed. Not this week. It might be next week or the following week, but you need to at least know where everything's going. And then lastly, someone that leads the construction. But normally to run this, you'll need a director. There'll need to be someone that is probably paid. And there'll need to be probably someone that's heading up the construction and heading up the casework. Those are the vital points of a long-term recovery. Again, the churches in Denham Springs, 3 weeks, it was up and going. And it was hard work, rolling up sleeves, but they did it. But see, the cool thing was the churches kept meeting like this, talking together. We have all the tools, so if you all decide to do this, we won't abandon you. We'll walk with you. We have done this 18 times. So we know what we're doing this year, but there's others on the road that know what they're doing too. They will come around and help you out. But we just wanted to plant that seed with you today, not try to form this today, because your brains are probably still thinking about how many homes have been impacted in our area, right? It's a lot of other stuff to think about. Know this, that I have money set aside for you. That's just for the people. Now, as we raise money, I don't know how much it's going to be raised, we're always going to come behind and sow into the repair and rebuild of homes. So that's our commitment, and has always been our commitment. Will it be $1 million? Will it be $10 million? That I don't know. Will it be 500,000? I don't know. So we're starting. We've been raising funds, but we're trying to utilize our position because we are pretty well known in the Austin area to try to pull as much money for these areas and for the Austin area. In the Austin area, we're praying it doesn't get impacted.
Right. And to funnel that through the local church, through you guys, you're doing the real work and are committed to this community long term. And I'll just say this just as a clarifying point, and correct me if this needs to be refined, but there's kind of two components that we're talking about. One is an alliance or whatever it ends up being termed, right? That's this network of local churches and local pastors united in their efforts, not in just this disaster, but even beyond it. And then the long-term recovery committee is something that's activated during disaster response, that these other organizations, like we've seen here today, will come sit at the table, that this organization, right, this Hill Country Alliance of Pastors, would come and sit at the table as well, and may even have multiple roles at that table, but those are two distinct groups. Does that make sense?
The more roles you can play, I think again, for the sake of the gospel going forth, it's very positive.
Yeah. But we want to open it up to questions before we jump into maybe a couple of specific questions that we have for you. Are there any questions that any of you have?